The hallway behind the stage smelled like metal, dust, and nerves. It was the kind of place where dreams either took their first breath or quietly suffocated. Daniel Carter stood there, pressed against the cold wall, listening to the muffled roar of the audience on the other side. Thousands of people, thousands of expectations, and he wondered, maybe for the 100th time that day, what on earth he was doing there. His name badge felt heavier than it should have, Daniel Carter. Nothing special about it, no stage name, no sparkle, just the name of a man who had spent most of his life blending into the background, hoping not to be noticed, learning early that survival mattered more than being seen. At 42, Daniel didn't look like someone chasing a dream. His jacket was borrowed from a neighbor, the sleeves a little too long. His shoes were polished, but worn thin at the soles from years of delivery routes and late night grocery runs. His hands, rough, scarred, honest, told a story his face tried to hide. A production assistant walked past and called another contestant's name. Laughter followed, confidence, youth. Daniel swallowed and adjusted his grip on the microphone he hadn't yet earned the right to hold. "You can still leave," a voice whispered inside him. "No one would blame you. No one even knows you're here." He closed his eyes, and just like that, the noise faded. Instead, he was back in a small kitchen in Ohio, the one with the cracked linoleum floor and the window that never quite closed all the way. Morning light spilled across a chipped table. His mother sat there, wrapped in an old cardigan, humming softly while the coffee brewed. It was always Elvis. She didn't sing loudly. She didn't sing well, but she sang with a smile that made the room warmer. Some mornings, when the pain in her joints was too much or the fear in her eyes too obvious, she would stop humming and just listen. Daniel would turn on the radio, and for a few minutes the world felt lighter. "Promise me something," she'd said a few weeks ago, her voice fragile but firm. "What?" Daniel asked, already knowing. "Promise you won't give up on the part of you that sings, even when life tells you to be quiet." He had laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it hurt too much to answer honestly. Life had told him to be quiet for a long time. His father had passed when Daniel was young. Bills came before dreams. Responsibility came before hope. When his classmates talked about college and careers, Daniel talked about work schedules and overtime. Singing became something he did alone, in the truck between deliveries, in the kitchen late at night, in hospital parking lots while waiting for test results. Never on a stage. The announcement echoed down the hallway. "Daniel Carter, you're up next." His heart slammed against his ribs. His feet felt rooted to the floor. For a split second he thought about his mother sitting at home, clutching the TV remote with both hands, praying quietly like she always did. She had insisted he come. "You don't need to win," she told him. "Just let the world hear the truth in you." Daniel took a step forward, then another. The curtain parted and the stage opened up like an ocean of light. The audience blurred into a glowing mass of faces. Applause rolled over him, not for who he was, but for who they hoped he might be. He walked to the center of the stage, every step echoing. The judge's table came into focus. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. The other judges smiled politely, curiosity mixed with caution. Daniel felt suddenly exposed, like a secret that had wandered into the open. "So," Simon said, glancing at his card, "Daniel Carter, tell us about yourself." The microphone trembled slightly as Daniel lifted it. He cleared his throat. "I'm a delivery driver," he said. His voice sounded smaller than he wanted it to, and, "I take care of my mom." That was it. No dramatic backstory, no tragedy polished for television. "Just truth," Simon nodded slowly. "And why are you here?" Daniel hesitated. The practiced answers evaporated. What came out instead surprised even him. "Because my mom believes I still have something worth hearing." The room shifted. A few audience members leaned forward. One judge softened. Simon's expression flickered. "Just for a moment. That's a lot of pressure," Simon said. "What will you be singing today?" Daniel inhaled deeply. This was the moment he'd feared and trusted all at once. Elvis. A ripple passed through the crowd, some smiles, some raised eyebrows, some silent judgments already forming. Daniel caught Simon's reaction. A slight tightening of the jaw, arms crossing instinctively. Elvis songs weren't just songs, they were sacred ground, and sacred ground doesn't forgive mistakes. But Daniel didn't see the doubt anymore. He saw his mother's smile. He felt the weight of every quiet sacrifice. He remembered every moment kindness had gone unnoticed. And for the first time in years, he didn't shrink. He stood taller. "Whenever you're ready," Simon said. Daniel closed his eyes, not to hide, but to remember who he was singing for. The music hadn't even started yet, but something had already changed. For the first time, Daniel Carter wasn't invisible, and in just a few seconds, one note would prove it. The music had not started yet, but the doubt already had. It hung in the air like a fog, thick, quiet, and heavy with expectation. The kind of silence that judges performances before a single sound is made. Daniel stood at the center of the stage, eyes still closed, breathing slowly, trying to steady the tremor running through his chest. From the judges' table, Simon Cowell leaned back, arms crossed. He had seen this moment thousands of times, the hopeful contestant, the bold song choice, the familiar confidence that often collapsed under pressure. Elvis' songs were a gamble, sometimes a tribute, often a trap. Most tried to imitate the king. Few understood him. Simon exhaled through his nose. Another one, he thought. The audience murmured softly. Some smiled with anticipation. Others whispered with skepticism. A few folded their arms, preparing for either brilliance or embarrassment. The name Elvis carried weight. Memories, legends, comparisons no singer could escape. Daniel felt all of it without opening his eyes. The band waited. The opening note hovered, unplayed, like a question no one wanted to ask out loud. His hands were cold now. He wrapped his fingers tighter around the microphone, grounding himself in its solid reality. His heart beat fast, but beneath the fear was something steadier, something older, a memory. He remembered the first time he truly listened to Elvis. He had been 16, sitting in his father's old pickup truck, parked behind the grocery store after a long shift. The engine was off, the radio crackled, and then that voice came through, tired but strong, tender but unbreakable. It didn't sound perfect. It sounded human. That was when Daniel realized something important. Great voices don't try to impress. They try to connect. The music finally began, soft, slow, respectful. A few piano notes drifted into the theater, the kind that asked for patience, the kind that dared you to feel something. Simon leaned forward slightly, not consciously. Just enough to listen. Daniel opened his eyes. He didn't look at the judges. He didn't look at the crowd. He stared somewhere just above the lights, as if aiming his voice toward a place only he could see. And then he sang, not the chorus, not the showy part, just the opening line, one note. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it didn't reach for the ceiling, but it landed, it carried weight, like a hand resting gently on a shoulder you didn't know was tense. It carried honesty, shaped by years of restraint and quiet endurance. There was no imitation in it, no performance mask. The murmurs stopped. Simon froze. He didn't mean to. He didn't even realize it at first. But his pen slipped from his fingers and clattered softly against the table. His eyes narrowed, not in judgment, but focus. That's not training, he thought. That's experience. Daniel continued, his voice steady now, growing braver with each breath. He didn't oversing. He didn't decorate the melody. He trusted it, trusted himself, trusted the truth he was carrying. The audience leaned forward as one. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman pressed her hand to her mouth. A man blinked rapidly, surprised by the sudden tightness in his chest. They didn't know Daniel's story, but they felt it. The song began to open up, like a letter unfolding slowly. Each line revealed a little more of the man behind the voice. Loss, hope, gratitude, regret, love that had been given freely and asked for nothing in return. Simon's posture changed, his arms uncrossed. His skepticism softened into something quieter, rarer, respect. He had expected a tribute. What he was hearing was a confession. Daniel's voice wavered just slightly on one line, not from weakness but emotion. He caught himself, steadied his breath, and sang on. That imperfection only made it real. The band followed him now, not leading but listening. For the first time that day, Daniel forgot where he was. He wasn't on a stage. He wasn't being judged. He was back in that kitchen again, singing softly while his mother smiled, believing in him without condition. The audience felt that belief too. When the first section of the song ended, there was no applause, only silence, not the awkward kind, the sacred kind, the kind you don't break because something important is still happening. Simon swallowed. He had heard polished voices. He had heard flawless technique. But this was something else. This was the sound of someone who had lived their way into music. Daniel took a breath, preparing for what came next. The fear was gone now. In its place was something stronger, purpose. The doubt that had filled the room moments earlier had vanished, replaced by a fragile hope that something unforgettable was unfolding. And the song had only just begun. Time does strange things when truth enters a room. As Daniel moved into the heart of the song, something invisible but undeniable shifted inside the theater. It was as if the air itself had leaned closer. The lights no longer felt blinding. The crowd no longer felt distant. Everything narrowed to one fragile thread, the sound of a man finally being heard. Daniel's voice deepened, not in volume, but in meaning. Each word carried the weight of a life lived quietly, responsibly, lovingly. He wasn't singing at the audience. He was singing with them, inviting them into moments they didn't know they shared. A line about longing hung in the air longer than expected. And that was when it happened. Simon Cowell stopped breathing, not dramatically, not intentionally. His body simply forgot what to do for a second. His eyes locked onto Daniel, not with judgment, not with calculation, but with recognition. The kind that sneaks up on you and reminds you of something you thought you'd buried. The note Daniel held wasn't technically impressive. It didn't stretch. It didn't bend. It simply stayed honest, exposed. Unafraid to be exactly what it was. That single note carried memories Simon hadn't visited in years. Late nights, early failures, moments when music wasn't a business yet, but a lifeline. He felt it press against his chest, uncomfortable and familiar. He leaned forward slowly, elbows resting on the table. Around him, the other judges sensed it too. One tilted her head, eyes glistening. Another pressed his lips together, nodding almost unconsciously. They weren't listening anymore. They were feeling. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he reached the next verse, not from fear, but from the realization that this moment mattered. He could feel the room breathing with him. He could feel people holding on to his pauses, waiting for his next word like it might explain something about their own lives. In the audience, a young man lowered his phone. He'd started recording out of habit, chasing a viral clip. Now he forgot why he had it in his hand. A woman in the front row clasped her husband's fingers tighter, tears slipping down her cheeks without warning. No one was thinking about Elvis anymore. They were thinking about themselves. Their parents, their sacrifices, the love they hadn't said out loud. Daniel reached the emotional core of the song, the place where the melody softened and the lyrics confessed what pride usually hides. His voice cracked on a word about devotion, a tiny fracture, barely there. It was perfect, because it wasn't weakness. It was proof that he wasn't pretending, proof that he was risking something, proof that this wasn't about winning. It was about honoring a life that had taught him how to care for others before himself. Simon's mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes never left Daniel. The skepticism that had lived there minutes earlier was gone, replaced by awe and something dangerously close to humility. This is why people sing, Simon thought. This is why people listen. Daniel didn't notice any of it. He was somewhere else now, somewhere fragile and brave. He sang the next line softer, trusting the room to meet him there, and they did. The band followed his tempo, restrained and reverent. Even the cameras seemed to move more gently, careful not to disturb what was happening. When Daniel reached the note, the one that mattered most, he didn't push it. He didn't chase perfection. He let it rise naturally, shaped by breath and memory. That note didn't soar, it settled, right into the hearts of everyone listening. Simon's fingers curled against the table. He didn't blink. He didn't move. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what he would say next. He was listening like it was the first time. Daniel held the note just long enough to be felt, then released it into silence. No applause followed, no cheering, just stillness, the kind of stillness that feels earned. Daniel opened his eyes slowly, almost afraid to look. The audience wasn't blurred anymore. Faces stared back at him, softened, changed, awake. Some nodded, some wiped tears, some simply breathed like they had been holding it in for years. Simon exhaled. The spell wasn't broken yet, but it was close. Daniel moved into the final lines of the song, voice steady, grounded, free. There was no doubt left in the room, no skepticism, no distance, only respect, only connection, only the shared understanding that something rare had just happened, something that couldn't be rehearsed or manufactured. When the final note faded, it didn't disappear. It stayed, lingering in the silence, living in the hearts it touched. And in that moment, before the applause, before the praise, before the world decided what this performance meant, Daniel Carter stood center stage, no longer invisible. He had stopped time. The silence after the song did not end, it softened. It stretched across the theater like a warm blanket, heavy with meaning. No one rushed to fill it. No one dared to clap too soon. It was the kind of quiet that arrives only when something real has just passed through a room and left its mark. Daniel stood motionless at the center of the stage, microphone lowered slightly, chest rising and falling as if he had just surfaced from deep water. His heart was still racing, but his mind felt strangely calm. For the first time since he had walked onto that stage, he wasn't afraid of what came next. He had already given everything he had. The applause began slowly, one pair of hands, then another. Not explosive, not wild, grateful, respectful. It grew like a wave, swelling as the audience rose to its feet. People clapped not just for the performance, but for the courage it took to be that honest in front of strangers. Daniel blinked, stunned. He had imagined applause before, late at night, alone, humming into the darkness. But nothing prepared him for this. The sound wrapped around him, lifting a weight he didn't realize he'd been carrying for decades. He searched the crowd instinctively, as if expecting to see one familiar face. His mother wasn't there, but somehow she was everywhere. The judges stood as well one by one, except Simon, who remained seated for a moment longer, hands folded, eyes fixed on Daniel with a look that was no longer critical, but contemplative. He stood last slowly, deliberately, as if standing meant acknowledging something personal. The applause finally settled. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. He raised the microphone again, not because he was asked to speak, but because something inside him needed to be said. This song, his voice wavered, he paused, taking a breath. This song isn't really about me. The room leaned in. I sing it every morning. Daniel continued, while helping my mom get ready for the day. She's sick. Some days are harder than others, but she always tells me music reminds her she's still alive, not just surviving. A hush fell over the audience again, this time tender. She believes in kindness, he said softly, even when it costs something, even when nobody sees it. Daniel's hands trembled now, not from fear, but from love. So tonight, I sang for her, and for anyone who's ever taken care of someone and felt invisible doing it. He lowered the mic. A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. A man nodded slowly, jaw clenched. Caregivers, parents, children, people who knew exactly what Daniel meant. The song had stopped being a performance. It had become a gift. Simon cleared his throat. I want to say something, he said, his voice quieter than usual, stripped of its edge. The room went still. Daniel looked toward the judge's table, bracing himself. I've heard Elvis sung in every way imaginable, Simon began. Some technically brilliant, some not so much. A small, knowing smile crossed his face, but what you did tonight wasn't about Elvis. Daniel listened, heart pounding. It was about responsibility, love, showing up when no one's watching. Simon paused, choosing his words carefully. You reminded me that music isn't meant to impress, it's meant to connect. The audience applauded softly in agreement, and that, Simon continued, is something you can't teach. Daniel nodded, tears threatening now. He looked down at the stage floor, overwhelmed by a sense of release. Years of doubt, of being overlooked, of believing he had waited too long, loosening their grip all at once. Another judge leaned forward. "I didn't see a contestant up there," she said. "I saw a son. That word, son, hit Daniel harder than anything else. He pressed his lips together, breathing through the emotion. For so long." She continued, "People like you don't get a stage. Tonight, you didn't just take it, you shared it." Daniel felt something open inside him, a realization he hadn't expected. This wasn't about proving himself. It was about offering something meaningful. He thought of his mother again, of how she always held the door for strangers, even when her hands shook. How she insisted on thanking people who barely noticed. How she taught him that generosity wasn't about being seen. It was about being true. The audience erupted again, louder now, standing once more. This time Daniel didn't freeze. He let it wash over him. He smiled, not the nervous kind, but the kind that comes from deep understanding. He hadn't come here to change his life, but he had changed something else. He had reminded people of their own quiet strength, their own unseen kindness, their own capacity to care, and that mattered more. As the applause finally faded, Daniel stood tall, shoulders relaxed, heart full. The stage no longer felt intimidating. It felt like a bridge, between strangers, between stories, between hearts that had just met. The song was over, but its purpose had just begun. The applause did not fade all at once. It lingered, drolling, rising, settling, then rising again, as if the audience wasn't quite ready to let Daniel Carter go. Some moments change you quietly. Others announce themselves with thunder. This one did both. Daniel stood beneath the lights, unsure where to place his hands, his smile fragile but real. The weight in his chest wasn't fear anymore, it was relief. The kind that comes when you finally say something you've been holding inside for years and realize the world didn't turn away. Simon stepped forward, microphone in hand. "I want to be very clear," he said, his voice steady but different now. Less judge, more witness. "What just happened here isn't about votes." The audience murmured in agreement. People often think success is about being the loudest, the flashiest, the most unforgettable. Simon paused, eyes still on Daniel. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth quietly. Daniel felt his throat tighten. "You walked onto this stage as someone most people would overlook," Simon continued, "and you reminded all of us that dignity doesn't need an introduction." The crowd rose again, this time not in excitement, but in respect. Daniel nodded, overwhelmed. He had come expecting judgment. What he found instead was understanding. The other judges added their voices, not as critics, but as people changed by what they'd heard. One spoke about her own parent, the years she'd taken for granted. Another talked about how rare it was to see someone offer vulnerability as a gift rather than a plea. Daniel listened, absorbing every word, not as praise, but as confirmation that kindness still had a place in a world that often rewarded noise. When the time came to vote, the moment felt almost ceremonial. Each yes landed softly but firmly, like a door opening rather than a victory being claimed. By the final vote, the outcome was clear, but the result felt secondary. Daniel wasn't celebrating, he was reflecting. As he thanked the judges and turned toward the audience one last time, he raised the microphone again, not out of obligation, but gratitude. "I don't know what happens after tonight," he said honestly. "I don't know where this road leads." A pause. "But I do know this every person out there who takes care of someone, who chooses patience over praise, who keeps going even when no one claps." His voice cracked, just slightly. "You matter." The room went still. "Music gave me a voice tonight," Daniel continued, "but kindness gave me a reason to use it." He lowered the mic, bowing his head. Not to the judges, not to the cameras, but to the people who understood. Backstage, the noise returned. Crew members moved quickly. Contestants whispered. Producers smiled knowingly. But Daniel walked through it all in a daze, like someone who had just woken from a long, heavy dream. A staff member pressed a phone into his hand. "It's your mom," she said gently. Daniel's hands shook as he answered. "Did you hear it?" His mother asked, her voice trembling, not with worry, but joy. "I did." Daniel whispered. There was a pause on the line, then she laughed softly. I knew you had it in you, she said. I always did. Tears fell freely now. Daniel closed his eyes, the stage lights replaced by something warmer, smaller, more meaningful. You didn't sing like Elvis, she continued. You sang like you. That was all he needed. When the call ended, Daniel stood alone for a moment, breathing deeply. The world hadn't changed, but something inside him had. He no longer measured his worth by how loudly he was heard. He understood now that impact didn't require permission. Weeks later, clips of his performance spread. People shared it with captions about their parents, their caregivers, their unseen battles. Comments poured in, not about technique, but about connection. This made me call my mom. This reminded me why I keep going. Thank you for making me feel seen. Daniel returned to his routines, doctor visits, grocery lists, quiet mornings filled with Elvis songs and coffee. But something was different now. He sang with his head a little higher. His mother smiled a little wider. He hadn't become famous overnight. He had become free, and that, he realized, was the real reward. Because sometimes one honest note doesn't just stop time. It reminds us who we are.